The pledge, please.
Yes, sir.
Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Just a few comments before we begin. Number one is our chairman, Mr. Flynn, will not be here tonight. He has a family obligation. Tonight, we're going to discuss administrative and general, and it's before us. A couple changes, though. We may be going out of order. Our town clerk is at a special meeting for the RTM. She'll be here a little late, from what I understand. And not on this list is Fair TV, although they are included in administrative and general. Is it fair to say that somebody will be here to represent Fair TV? Very good.
So we're not tonight?
You are. You are. You are tonight. And before we begin, Mr. Walsh has requested that he be allowed to make a comment. Mr. Walsh?
I just wanted to apologize for missing last night's meeting. I had a death in my family that I've been attending to for the last, well, actually, last 2 days, but some medical issues with that for the last week. And because of that, I kind of slipped my mind that last night was my night to bring refreshments. So I just wanted to apologize to my board members for that faux pas. And we can get moving. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. The good news is we were done a little after 10, so we survived. But thank you. Any comments from the board or from the first selectman before we start? Okay. Well, Mr. Tetro, you're the first on the list tonight to present the Board of Selectmen budget.
All right, just in keeping with our custom of this year, the Board of Selectmen does not have any revenue, but we might want to turn to the revenue section just to explain why there is none this year. And Linda, if you could help me with the page number there.
Well, we have none under the selectmen department.
Right, I think on page 49, the point which I was trying to make is there had been some revenue in past years, and this was specifically related to, I think the primary driver of that was fees for banners on Sherman Green, and in agreement with the Economic Development Department, we shifted that revenue over to them, so they can, the Economic Development Department collects parking fees and uses that revenue to help kind of promote downtown, also do some maintenance, that type of thing, and Mark Barnhart can certainly describe that in more detail. But we thought it made sense to take the whatever banner revenue, it's a couple $1,000s a year, I don't mean to sound like this is a lot of money, but put it to some place where it could do the most good.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tetro. So if we're done with revenue, we'll go to page 73. 73, 74, and 75.
It's 74 and 75 with the numbers. And let me take, just to set the stage, in the First Selectman's office, the recommendation is for $564,000. That's a 23% increase. However, that's really driven by one number, which is $100,000 in the First Selectman's budget to fund a strategic plan for the town. If you take that out, I think you'll see that the overall increase for the department is $106,000 over last year. The second biggest driver is just the salary increase. You'll see some of the other lines. All the other lines are relatively small. There's a few decreases in those. So in speaking to the strategic plan, the goal there is that as you've heard from other departments, we've actually done a good job of compiling a number of plans in individual departments for different components of departments. I think one of the things that we need next is the overall strategic plan for the town to tie all this together, to take a long-term look at the town. This board has actually had a number of discussions along those lines, and kind of where are we going, where do we need to go, how do we make accommodations for this. We've seen in some cases where we've had some financial initiatives that get passed at this board and cut by another. I think it would help to have us all on the same page. I think the goal here is to provide bring in an outside firm, consulting firm, to help us engage the community, engage the stakeholders. I've had a chance to talk to the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council about this. I've had a chance to talk to a firm that's in the business and talk about some of the projects they've done to help frame both the dollars and the timing. The timing could be anywhere from 9 to 18 months based on how much engagement is involved with the community and how that takes place. So with that as an intro, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Tetro. As Mr. Tetro has said, this board, and really led by our chairman, Tom Flynn, for this board, this has been a point of discussion for years. When I say 4 years, I mean for many years, with the Board of Selectmen and with the first selectman. So it's budgeted at $100,000 this year. It's the first time, I believe, we've had a line item for professional fees for strategic, specifically for a strategic plan.
Correct. This is the first time we've had an initiative to do that.
Right. We have had consultants come and talk to us. We've paid for a consultant 4 or 5 years ago. That was $50,000 that we expended on that, and they came and talked to us about our current model. Do you recall?
Board of Finance
I
funded
don't-
$30,000, no?
Yeah, I don't believe, not in terms of townwide strategic plan.
No. It wasn't, it wasn't for strategic plan. It was really to take a look at our model and take a look at efficiencies. And the Board of Ed had a,
Oh, that was the operating audit. One was done on the Board of Ed side, one was done on the town side. Correct, I think it was about $30,000 on each side, or in that ballpark.
right.
Yeah, we paid for it out of Board of...
This is a structurally different proposal
Exactly.
and recommendation.
Right. Just wanted to speak about that difference. And again, Mr. Flynn has asked many questions over the years in regards to a strategic plan. So just with that, I'll open up to the board for any questions, comments. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tetro. I'm all for a strategic plan. I'm curious what we think the deliverables are. 9 to 18 months sounds like somebody's actually here with us, helping us implement it, which I think is something that the operating audit didn't have behind it, so I'm all behind it. I wouldn't mind a little more detail to understand what again, what the deliverables are, what the whole thing is, but, I mean, I'm in favor of supporting it.
Yeah, that's the reason I reached out to the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council. They're basically a planning agency for all of this, and I said, do towns do this? How does this work? And
Okay.
basically, they offered their guidance, their support in helping develop an RFP or RFQ, which would be the first step in going out. And
Excellent.
certainly would involve some other people in town in terms of getting their input on that. It would go out to a number of firms. We'd see what comes back in terms of the qualification of the firm. There are, and one of my first questions was, are there firms out there that specialize in that do this type of thing on a regular basis? I don't think this is 100% of any firm's business.
Agree.
But it was good to see that people had done this for other municipalities. I reached out and have had a chance to review some of the RFPs, 4 or 5 RFPs that went out by other towns in different sizes, 20,000, 40, 30,000, 40,000, 45,000 population side, to see what types of things they were asking for, to get an idea of what might transpire there. The keys are, if this is going to be meaningful, 2 of the key components have got to be outreach, getting the citizens involved, and, or the other way to say that, I guess, is community engagement. We've got to get people involved. The idea is not to have this, be 10 people sitting around a table in some room and coming up with a plan. We really want the community engaged. And I think that's why, that's everything from public meetings to focus groups to social media to a website to track what's going on and have the community be involved, see what is transpiring over the course of that time, and get their input at each step of the way.
Great. Sounds good to me.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Becker?
Thank you. So the dollar figure, is that's a suggestion based upon our size that came from the regional entity, or is this, where are we getting that?
They talked about, and again, one of the reasons for reaching out to a firm in the business was to say, okay, what do these things cost? They sent me some RFPs back so I could judge that, and they said this is in the range of $60,000 to $80,000. Some of these were in the Midwest. As I said, they went up to about 45,000 people, so I increased that to 100,000 to compensate for Fairfield County, Connecticut, and a larger size town. And not knowing these other towns, my suggestion or thought process including the fact that we have a lot of opinionated people in town. And importantly, we want to make sure we listen to them in this.
And did they give any examples? I mean, have you seen kind of what the deliverable ended up looking like? I think on the operational audit side, one of the concerns that I had was that the 30,000 actually really, I mean, if you go and look in the documents, I remember, I think at one point they sent out a Word version, and you can see it was basically caked off of a template from another community. They kind of threw a lot of stuff and tried to make it work, but almost that a lot of people had noted that the 30,000 level, that was spent on that could have simply been a well-done audit on just one department, let alone the entire town. And so I'm thinking that this is probably a little higher level. You probably, from a detail standpoint, maybe they're okay at that, but I just want to make sure we get a good product, because I get concerned when we throw money out and don't get the right thing back.
No question. I think your example of the 30,000 on the operational audit is probably a great example. I don't think anybody that served on this board with at the time thought that was anywhere near enough. You needed to do a substantial job. So that I could argue on one hand, the results didn't let anybody down. And that's because nobody expected anything substantive to come back. So that was too little money at too large a task. And I know my opinion was that I would be surprised if we got anything substantive back out of that at the time, given there are a number of questions that were asked by this board when we had that presentation, and to the best of my knowledge, those questions have never been answered to this day. I wasn't impressed with the feedback that came through that either. So in this case, that was one of the reasons for reaching out to the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council. These are folks that do planning. They do a lot of different studies. Reaching out to an individual player to find out what they're doing. Not to, actually I try to avoid getting in too much detail because they might want to respond, and I didn't want any of the, I didn't want them biased or us biased in terms of going through that. But we will do a full RFQ to take a look at that and make sure that we are getting back what we need. And in that case, we'll look at samples. I thought one of the RFPs asked for examples of a firm, from the firm of plans that they did that were successful and plans that they did that weren't. And I thought that was a very interesting question. It kind of reminds me of the old 3M interview question, which is, don't tell me what you're doing, tell me your best mistake. All right? And let me see how you responded to that, how you came about that, and how you responded to that. So I was intrigued with that. But I think your questions are right on the money, and it's like trying to buy your first computer. You can wait a long time till you know enough to buy your first computer. At some point, you have to buy and learn with that. I think we want to get a firm that is experienced at working with us, has done this with other communities, done these in communities at least close to our size, if not exactly our size. We don't want somebody who's necessarily done something for Boston. We don't want something that spent all their time in towns the size of Easton. No disrespect to Easton, or Boston for that matter. But I think we want somebody who's experienced with our type of town and our type of community.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that as a response, and we're certainly on the same page about the operational, so thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Becker. Mr. Walsh?
Mike, are you fairly confident that the $100,000 will be enough to get us what we want, and that it will be able to be completed in the next fiscal year? based on your discussion
Do
you've had so far.
I get to say yes and no to that?
Sure.
Here's the yes side. It seems like a reasonable number based on what I've heard at this point. I think we want to get into, when we go out with the RFQ, we'll get more dollars back in terms of what it is, and whenever you're getting involved in something like this, where the key, I think one of the key cost drivers for the people doing the work will be the amount of community engagement, and how long does it take to get significant feedback. You know, in some communities, you have very well-defined neighborhoods or towns or sections of town. I think in some respects we do, but not in all respects we do. So I think that we may need a little more work in that. I think our residents are both intelligent, articulate, but also pretty fluent in things like social media, websites, email. So I think we can use technology to reach out to folks, perhaps better than some communities. But your question's right on money. I mean, that's why I think it's important to come up with a good RFP/RFQ, and I think we'll be looking very definitely at that coming back. And if it's not, we'll take more time, refine the RFP, and go back out. But by interviewing the regional council and talking to some of the folks there, and at least, and I reached out to one firm that did this at their recommendation to talk to somebody who had been through it. They were confident we could do it for that money. I still want to see that. For me, the key is stakeholder involvement and community engagement. And I think that's the measure of success. It's like a high school reunion. You know, they only work if everybody shows up. Yeah. It doesn't matter what the food is, what the music is, where you hold it. You need people, and we're going to need the community involved to do that. If we come through this and everybody's felt like they had a chance, they had their say, then it will be successful, and we'll know that we have good quality input coming out. Without that, you know, you can't do this with just, as I said, we certainly have a lot of intelligent folks and a lot of senior managers, but you couldn't put, I think, 10, 12 people in a room and say, we're going to do a strategic plan. I think we need something that has a lot more community involvement, so that was the reason for reaching out to this.
And I'm a supporter of this plan to do this, and I think this body has been and has requested it and talked about it enough. And I guess the question is in order so that there's not a lot of, or any disappointment, whatever, how would you feel about coming back to us before you formally issue it, just to show us, or at least talk to us about what's going to be in the RFQ or the RFP, just so that at the end of the day, it doesn't get put out, bid on, done, and then we get a product back, and then there's all these things we thought we were going to get and we didn't get.
Yeah, I would argue I want more involvement with that. I think that for key boards in town, we want to get the RFP out and get their input back to make
Great.
sure that their constituents, their segments are represented in terms of what we're asking the folks to do. I'd rather have somebody come back and say, you know, your 100 grand isn't right, we're going to need 150 grand to do this, then come back to the boards and say, here's what they've said, than to go out and have somebody say, yeah, we can do it for 50 grand.
Yes.
And that's going to end up like the operational audit.
Yes.
So the number was to get us something that's high enough for the budget, so if it goes over that, we can come back to the boards and it's an adjustment, not a big surprise. I just, knowing consultants, and again, I think we've all worked with consultants at different levels, I have a hard time seeing us doing it for much less than $80,000 or $90,000.
I agree. I just, and I think it's a good process so that we're all on the same page on this, and that, you know, if you need the money and, you know, we all get on the same page and it turns out to be 150,000 versus 100, it's going to be a lot easier to come back as opposed to putting something out, everyone bidding because they know there's $100,000 in the budget, everyone bidding in the $90,000 range, and all of a sudden we get a product and we're like, I wish they'd done X, Y, Z.
No question. I think this is truly one of those things we have to do together. It's not a department doing it, and I think one of the reasons for going outside and bringing somebody in, so any internal biases we have, you know, don't taint the results. It really is as close as we can get to an objective group coming in to help us identify who we are as a town and who we want to be down the road.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions, comments?
Just one quick follow-up.
Mr. DeWitt?
Sorry, I forgot to ask this before. So your intention is to fund the entire project this year, even though it could go 18 months, right? So the 104,000 or whatever that number may come out to be, we will fund it in this fiscal year.
In fiscal year 16,
15
I
is
believe,
16,
if
yeah.
perchance it went longer than that, I believe it would be one of those POs that would be encumbered like happens occasionally in other areas.
I'm with you.
So that it would
Good.
cover that, so regardless of the length of time. And
Yep.
no, I do not envision paying for it all up front,
Right, okay.
regardless of
No,
length of
I
time.
mean, we're not going to see 100,000 next year for Phase 2 of this? This is,
No,
this is one number, right?
The number I was given was
Right.
in the 60 to 80 grand range. I increased that to account for a slightly larger town size
Yep,
and to a kind of a Fairfield County factor, for lack of a better term.
great, thank you. That's a good answer.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any other questions or comments? Just two other questions, and one, I'm just curious. As far as you know, is there any other town in Connecticut that has gone through this process?
Not that I know of at the moment. And that's why I went to the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council. That's one of the COGs. There's a series of those around the state. Brian Badoli, who you've met, has come before this board before, is very well connected throughout the state, and nothing jumped to his mind at that. So I don't want to say categorically no, but nobody held up a shining example saying, West Hartford did it last year, boy, they loved their results, and you got to try it too.
Okay. And who's going to lead the charge? Is there one person that's going to lead the charge of you, or are you going to delegate this to somebody, or are you going to form a team inside to start this process and follow it through?
The part of that will depend on, to get it through the initial part out to the RFP, that type of thing, I'm going to take the lead on that. The practical side is that when it gets started, there are a couple ways to go, but definitely in some of the RFPs I saw, there's a stakeholder group. Now, how that works, or whether that's one group for the duration or some phased-in groups for different constituencies, that I'm really looking to the firm to help back with. But there, I believe there's got to be some sort of stakeholder group to help drive that.
Okay, very good. Any other questions or comments? Any comments from the public? Back to the board. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Alyssa Israel, 679 Roland Road. I actually came here for another reason tonight, but hearing this proposal sounds very interesting. I'm just curious, is this, would this community assessment be from a land use perspective, or what types of things would we be asking the public, for example?
Okay, let's take it from the top. One, this is not a community assessment in that sense. It's not just a fact, it's a strategic plan.
Okay.
Think about, simplest question, who do we want to be in 20 years? What's Fairfield look like in 20 years? All right, what are the challenges we have? What do we need to address? What do we need to start preparing for now?
In every sense of the question, every education, land use, every single
Yeah. The,
fire, floods, everything?
the closest thing we have until now is the library is undergoing a strategic plan now. The Board of It has their version of that. The Economic Development Group is doing their. We have a regional as well as a local plan for conservation and development. We've got flood mitigation plans. We've gone in the last 4 or 5 years from having very few plans to having lots of plans. So now the issue is, how do you tie them all together? And in a real sense, it's not because we have lots of money and are worried about spending it in the wrong places. It's because we don't have lots of money. And we need to make sure that we spend it in the right priorities and start building. The hardest thing for any town to do is to look at the long term. All right, so when you start, it's easy to look out the next 12 months, 24 months, what do we need to do from that perspective? But what things should we be doing now to be ready for what's taking place in 20 years? What happens when sea level rises a foot, and where are we? What
So-
happens
Okay.
when our industries or the economy changes and the things that we do well now and make money on now don't work anymore?
Thank you, Mr. Tetro. Just a comment. The forum is for public comment,
Not for questions?
not for questions. I
Oh.
appreciate the questions, but the forum is for comment. So if you
Not-
do have
not
any,
for clarity.
any other questions, you can submit them.
Oh, okay, to the First Selectman?
No, there's no questions.
Yeah.
It's
Okay,
only for comment.
Well, okay, but if I had a question, it would go to the First
Sure.
Selectman? Okay.
Alyssa, just email me. We'll talk.
I will. It's hard to comment without completely understanding what's being proposed, but I guess as part of this strategic plan, I would suggest doing a workplace audit and surveying staff. Who knows our town better than staff? And assessing the workplace environment and how the town is functioning on an internal level, and just get the staff perspective on everything that's going on in town. That's my suggestion as part of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Back to the board. Any? Oh, sure.
I'm Mary Hogan. I'm Chair of the Fairfield Forestry Committee, and we actually have one of these plans that Mike was talking about. And we are working with trying to implement or coordinate our plan with something that TPZ is doing. And so I think that the idea of having one complete plan that we can have goalposts and work towards is absolutely a wonderful idea. I have a certification in project management, so this is what I would expect, and I'm always surprised that we don't have that. I am always very interested in how the Board of Finance in particular looks and picks things apart. It helps me understand the budget, because I wouldn't get it otherwise, and I appreciate how diligently and thoroughly you go through everything. But I don't see how we can do that just on 1 year without understanding what we're aiming for in the future. So I think this is a marvelous idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the public? If not, I'll bring it back to the board one more time. And thank you very much.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, one reminder.
Does that ever work?
It used to work.
Play that game first.
Anyway.
It's a
It's all
gag,
right.
Mike.
I think it's a conspiracy of silence, right? Or to silence.
Plausible deniability.
I didn't say anything. Right. But just a reminder to the board, this is the year that the board has the responsibility to fix the salaries for the first selectman, the second and third selectman, and the town clerk for the 4-year period beginning November 16th, 2015. And that should be part of your voting agenda on April 2nd.
Thank you very much for that reminder. Mr. Walsh?
I've recently read Attorney Saxel's opinion again from 2011, and we definitely have to set the town clerk's salary pursuant to the charter. It's a little unclear about what our role is in the first selectmen's salaries. It looks like we just give a recommendation, and really that the RTM sets it. So if we're about to do that, what might make sense is for our town attorney currently to look at that opinion and just to either bless it, or if he thinks it's different, tell us he thinks it's different.
If you have a copy of that,
Okay,
could you
it's from
email that along?
2011, Dick Saxel did it.
Yeah, just, I'm not sure necessarily where that would be filed, but if you could,
Yes,
that'd be great.
but, yeah, that'd be great.
Because I don't remember the RTM
Yeah.
voting on that other than as part of the budget.
Yeah.
Because I remember.
But I'm hearing
in
rumblings that
2000
they want to be involved in it, so I
Yeah.
think we better all get on the
Kidding,
same page.
they want to be involved?
I know.
The,
Who would have guessed?
I know in 2011, several of us recused ourselves from the discussion here. We didn't recuse ourselves at the RTM. We weren't voting, but we were also there, and I don't remember any specific vote on that at that time period or previously.
I'll send it to you, and I'll
Okay.
send it to the rest, I'll give it to the chairman to send it to the rest of the boards, just so that we're all aware of what our role may be or might be, because he addresses state law and the state constitution, and we might want all this, before we go through that process, know what we're doing. So I will send it to our
Excellent
chairman to
suggestion.
distribute to everybody, and then I'll send it to the first selectman.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Mottola, did you have something, or just a comment? No, I just wanted a copy of it. Okay, very good.
So,
Mr. Becker?
so for the conversation, are we going to wait till that's circulated and then we'll take this item up, but we'll try to take it up prior to the voting night so that there's a conversation
Yeah,
and
we'll know
we
prior
have
to
some
vote.
time? So, because we only have 2 more meetings between,
Yeah. Well,
Now
Mr.
voting.
Walsh will get that to us.
Tomorrow.
We'll get that to
Tomorrow.
us tomorrow, and we'll start working on it
try to get
tomorrow.
on perhaps
right away.
Tuesday. So Tuesday or Thursday, we will talk about it though for, all right, great, thank you.
That'll be the goal.
March 26th would be the date, right?
Do-
Be a public, no public comment, Board of Finance.
We'll take it up
So it'd be
before.
Tuesday then, right?
Okay.
And can I ask, so we're going to hold up on the town clerk then and talk about all salaries kind of in their overall context then? Is that, That'd be my view, might be best,
Well,
because
the
they are
town-
somewhat relative.
The town clerk is pretty well specified in the town charter.
That's clear.
I think there's one sentence says the Board of
That-
Finance shall.
That's very clear.
Yeah.
And Mr. Saxel's gives one sentence on that that says that that is the most definitive part of it, that the Board of Finance has control over the town clerk.
No, I mean more so in that, from a dollar amount, that there is some relative, if you're moving up, typically, if we're moving one up, I think in the past, it's been moved up in relatively the same fashion, so I'm just suggesting that perhaps, and, you know, I defer to the chair, obviously, but perhaps we talk about them all the same night, so that it's all being talked about in the same overall context.
Yeah, it's a good point. Right.
Of course,
So we'll
Chair.
take, okay, thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Becker. We ready to move on? Okay. Mi- The town clerk is here, Mrs. Brown, just in time.
There's no direct route from Riverfield to school.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, are we going to get updates on events happening at other boards?
I'm sorry?
Are we going to get an update on events happening at other boards, as long as the town clerk is here?
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Okay. Mrs. Brown, you had a special meeting
We had a
tonight?
special meeting, and the vote was 7 in favor, 23 opposed. We have contract. To reject, so basically by rejecting, we're accepting.
In the strange custom of the RTM, that means the contract passed.
Okay.
30 present.
Thank you for the update. So, on the town clerk's budget, we'll go to revenue first. You guys ready? We'll go to revenue first on page 53. Any comments, Mrs. Brown, on the revenue?
Sorry, you said page 53?
Page 53 in our budget book.
I
Yes.
have 40.
So we have a three-year average of $2,122,000, it looks like. The budget for 2015 was $1,781,000. The budget for 2016, fiscal year 2016, is $1.9 million.
Yes, we've had favorable numbers for our conveyance tax, so I increased that based on performance. Let's see, my recording fees, unfortunately, are down. We have not had as many mortgages recorded, so we were averaging about 1,000 a month, and that has really dropped off. So that's why there's a reduction in that line. Also, they changed the law. I don't know how many of you are aware with the MERS recordings. So that money is not retained by the town like it used to be, the split we would get. Most of that money is now remitted to the state.
Any other comments?
Those are my big tickets.
Mr. Walsh?
Betsy, on the recording line that we were just talking about, on the right side where it says fiscal year and then it says department estimate, did you estimate that we'd have $260,000 of recording fees? What's the 260 again? On the right-hand side?
Yeah, that's where we dropped it down, just because we're not getting, like we used to get the
Okay.
$53 for one page.
Okay.
So the budget for this fiscal year that we're currently in is $320,000.
Yeah, so that is going, we're not going to hit that number, I don't think, at this point.
Any other comments, Mr. Walsh?
No, and the conveyance tax, was that based, the increase that you're going up to, is that based on a percentage that you thought that it might go up by, or?
It's just on the trend.
Trend, okay, okay. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions on revenue? Fairly consistent. Okay, then we go to page 76. Any comments? that you'd like to present?
My budget is actually a decrease. We had a long-term employee leave. She retired, so my payroll numbers are all down. That means longevity, all the personal services numbers. So, and that's reflected. Also, I was able to reduce my printing and binding line. That's basically, now that we have the new tax system, we used to get individual town tax liens and sewer use liens. Now we're doing a blanket lien, so I don't have to create as many books.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Merriam.
Hi, Betsy. Are you looking to replace the person who retired, or are
Yeah, she was replaced.
She was
So
replaced.
it's a lower starting salary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments for Betsy?
Flat budget.
It's a flat budget.
Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Register of voters. Up.
Do Fair TV?
We could do Fair TV. We'll do Fair TV. Come on up. Thank you. Just right at the next page, page 79. 79 and 80. Yes, sir. Any comments for the board?
The RTM passed an ordinance in January. It establishes Fair TV, and it states in the ordinance that it shall cover the primary elected bodies in town, which includes this board. The amount that you're being asked to approve is the same as last year. It covers two things. It covers what we believe at the Fair TV Committee will allow us to cover that primary schedule, and will allow us to deliver it over the internet through Fair TV On Demand. There's basically two line items. There's about $47,450 in what amounts to the labor costs for the taping and the production and the post-production and all the rest of the work. And there's $3,000 for what's a system called PEG Central, which is simply a integrated server farm that takes our signal when it's broadcast live, like I believe tonight, and is recorded and put on Cablevision and AT&T UVerse, and then also sends it to this server farm as an MPEG-4, and then allows you to watch yourself whenever you want to on the internet. And those are the two costs we ask the town to cover. Additionally, Fair TV does receive, on an annual basis, through a process created by the state, some level of a competitive grant each year. The average amount is about $28,000. It was the view of the committee, as it makes way for the permanent commission that will succeed it this spring, that the best approach going forward in terms of how Fair TV would handle itself is to ask for the core operating expense, the labor, and the server farm I just mentioned to provide the internet access to all citizens. You can watch it on your iPhone if you want to get that from the town side. And then for the grant, which is provided through a process set up by the state where funds are provided by Cablevision subscribers and then divided by among 4 other communities in our region, we would essentially look for 2 other additional types of funding. One, capital funding. That funding would be for things like, should we need a new server in the future, although my understanding in talking with the manufacturers, we're in good shape on that. Do we want to add camera packages? We're looking to add, for example, a hard drive camera, which will allow us to begin to cover sporting events. Our current cameras you see around this room are actually digital tape, so we actually have to actually put those into a computer and convert them. So that would allow us, we're also looking at the possibility as well of setting up a system that would allow us to do remote live. This would, there's some pieces that would be added to our current setup, and again, these would be funded by that grant. And as I said, on an annual basis, it averages about $28,000. The second piece, in addition to our capital needs, which are very limited, we also do, as required under the grant, under the new ordinance, some secondary programming. And these are public meetings of different kinds. They can be additional gavel-to-gavel meetings. It can be, these can be public meetings or public events like graduations, parades, ceremonies during holidays. And the additional cost for the labor for that, by and large, would also come from this grant from what's known as the Cable Advisory Council of Area 2, As I said, we tend to see about a 60-40 split out of that. In other words, if we get about 28 every year on average, we'll see 15 or 16 available for potential usage in our capital, and about 12 to 14 for our labor. The reason we think that the grant is the better way to go in terms of our capital costs is that we're able to roll that money over. As long as we have a reasonable set of information for the Cable Advisory Council of Area 2, and then through them, PURA, the state regulatory agency that looks at this, they'll allow us to hang on to some money if we want to go ahead and spend it on something else. And that's why we think that's a reasonable way to go. But that's basically it. That's what we're asking for.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Stone?
I just don't understand. So there's no line item for labor or in here?
I don't have the budget book with me. What I do have is our request, and there are, from what I understand, what we put in were just for 2 items. And thanks very much, Mr. First Selectman. Thanks. Great. Yeah, here it is. I'm sorry. Thanks, Bob, to explain.
Yeah.
What you have here is fees and professional services, Fair TV, $46,455.
So that's the labor?
That's the labor. Essentially, the arrangement worked out under the new ordinance is that Fair TV, at least for now, won't add to the TO of the town. What it will do is the commission will continue probably in its current agreements that were worked out between the First Selectman's office and our current operators, unless there's some change, but it's unlikely. But the idea would be that these individuals continue to work on a 1099 basis as consultants.
Okay.
So these are not town employees. They essentially work from 4 p.m. to midnight. They have demonstrated ability to do this work in a professional basis. They do it, in other words, and they also, most importantly, do work that the town otherwise does not, or the entity otherwise does not engage in. This is the state DOL test under ABC, whether or not you're an employee or not. In other words, Fair TV is not a lawyer, is not an engineer, is not a secretary. The town of Fairfield may record audio tape as part of its government function, but that's a state FOIA requirement. What the RTM has done in the creation of this ordinance has essentially said the town will allow itself to be videotaped and broadcast. But it is worth noting, I should say, though, that that number is flat. You know, we did work out, and I can provide to anyone on the board who wants to see it. In December, the committee met and essentially fleshed out the current agreement, or the current set of duties for the individuals who do this kind of work, to make sure they're in line with DOL requirements. And you're certainly welcome, if anyone would like to have an email with that, I'm happy to provide that. But it should give you some sense that the scope of the duties are limited, and that we wouldn't therefore come back needing some huge amount of money. Individuals involved in this work know how much we pay, and it wouldn't be somewhere halfway through the year we would somehow tell you that the ordinance somehow required us we need $30,000 more. We understood what those requirements were in the ordinance passed by the RTM, and that's why we've asked you for this, which is essentially flat. It's $49,450 from last year, $49,450 this year. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mr. Stone, anything else? Okay.
That's what my wife always said.
Any other?
Get the point.
Any other questions, comments from the board? Any comments from the public? Back to the board, one last chance. Thank you very much.
If you could indulge me, I just want to say thank you to this board and to the Board of Selectmen for their continued ongoing support for Fair TV. It's much appreciated, I know, amongst the committee members and everyone else who is glad that it's there, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the Register of Voters. Just flip it to the next page, page 84, 85, Mr. Torre. Is Mr. Wagner here? Who knows, right? You're not watching him?
Not your night to watch.
Okay.
We have a communication problem in my office, if you heard. He doesn't talk, to me at least.
Okay. Roger, any comments?
We're a little bit, this is a municipal election year, so we're a little bit less in the money-wise this election, this year as opposed to last year. Also, the Redistricting has been done, so we're set with 10 districts. Next year, when we do the federal, we'll only have 11. There's one split district, so we don't have to worry about the multiple lines and what have you as we had before. Regarding redistricting, there are two polling places that we're going to have to redo in terms of phone lines. No matter what we do in those districts, there's going to be two. And I believe the way we worked in the past, my department was being charged for the annual billing for the phone lines, and the installation costs were being passed through IT, because that's what they do. We're on the Centric system. That may happen. I have $1,000 anyways for landlines in the budget, so in case, somebody's short, that should cover it. In terms of the other costs regarding redistricting, we're probably going to have to do a mailing sometime before the election, whether it's the general election in November or if there's a primary. We'll have to do that, say within that month before, and make sure everybody knows where they're going. In terms of the polling places, even if you register now, because we haven't set the actual polling places, when you get a letter saying you've been accepted as a voter in town, it just says where a polling place normally would be on your letter. It basically says, to be determined, we'll notify you, type of thing. Okay.
Will that information be on the website as well?
I haven't checked our website recently. It should be, if not, otherwise I'll get hold of Kathleen over at the First Selectman's office.
Okay.
We could probably do something like that.
Okay. Mr. Walsh?
Roger, with it being the election year, the type of election year you discussed, why is fees and professional services going up by 45%? From 4,550 to 6,600. What's driving that number?
Hang on a minute. Card program. We have 5,000 for memory card programming, 1,000 for the IVS, which is that accessible voting fax machine system. Normally in the federal election or state election, the state picks up those costs.
Okay.
And in this year, in the municipal election or any local election, referendum, what have you, that gets picked up by us. There's also about 600 in there for a trainer to train the moderators. That's in there too. Those are the only 3 lines.
Is the $600 a new training process for the moderators?
It's not for the moderators, it's to hire a trainer. And it's usually about 30, it's one of the registrars from Norwalk. She usually charges about $35 a person to train. It's a 5-hour course.
Okay. So in that line, that's why the fiscal year 14, you're almost near $6,000 because of the memory card as well, because that's a similar...
Yeah, well, we had multiple, if you remember, multiple memory cards. We also had the absentees on those, and we had multiple districts on those also. It was also, it's a little more expensive for ours because of the length of the offices. For the federal election, we only had maybe about 6, 7. We're going to have like 31. Hopefully, we can get it on one page on the front instead of flipping it over on the back.
Okay, a couple more questions. These are not large numbers, they're just larger percentages
Yeah.
that ask the questions. And the next one is the same thing. Rental and storage is going up by 25%. Is there new storage for stuff that we need?
That has to do with, we were using the senior center.
For
Okay,
free?
When I put this together, we were using the senior center as a polling place. At times, we were using a member of the Public Works to come and open the place up, because we're opening it up off hours, either on the Monday before or that election day at 5 o'clock in the morning out of the staff. We're also closing it at 10 or 11 or 12 o'clock at night. So we used to use Public Works. The former building maintenance supervisor, I guess to save cost in his department, decided not to use that person anymore. The senior center does have a cleaning service that's there, and past couple times, we've used the cleaning service person who's been paid extra, and that bill gets passed on to me for him to be there. And also it was to be for training of our poll workers.
Okay.
So as long as he's there, he's getting paid, for opening up and locking up after hours for us. We're going to pay either a Public Works person in overtime, or we're going to pay the cleaning service overtime to use that building.
Okay. And this is the last question. Special departmental supplies went up 20%. It seems to have gone up about 100% or 500% over the last 4 or 5 years. Is this going to be a number that continues to grow, and why?
We were a little short the current year when we did it. It's basically for the batteries for the scanners.
Okay.
They usually cost about $30 a piece.
Okay.
The last time, we have this maintenance contract, which basically it's sort of like a furnace contract. The person comes along, he looks at the thing and says, oh, you need this, you need that, and that's what gets charged, and that's where it comes out of. The last time we did it, I normally did like 15 or so batteries. This last time it hit us, it was over, just in my mind, like 25. So we were over in that thing. So I added that next time.
25 times 30? Because that would be more than that budget line.
Yeah, well, that's what happened. We were over, and we had to grab money out of other things to take care of that. I took it out of the regular maintenance thing. We have 28 scanners.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's what happens. We had some that had newer batteries in it. For some reason, they just died.
Okay.
That was the other problem.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. A quick question on the phone line.
Yep.
So the polling machines aren't connected by the phone lines, correct?
The IVS system, which is that fax machine that you usually see off to the side type of thing that's used for people with disabilities.
Okay.
Basically visual disabilities. That is a dedicated long-distance line
Okay.
that runs from our office up to the state, and it also runs to this other place in Tennessee that actually does it. That is a phone line. We also have the regular moderator's phone line that is used for,
Right.
looking up people and what have you. So it's basically 2 phone lines that go in there.
So we have no opportunity to go digital on this stuff or cellular or anything?
We did cellular a couple of years ago. The schools that we had them in are not good for cellular. Basically, the high schools where you got a lot of steel and stuff, they were not good for those places. I don't know if it's the same system we always, Verizon or whatever it is, those have. It's fairly good. Even the phone I have, that's the town cell phone, you can't use it in some places, it just doesn't carry. The cafeteria down at Ludlow is also a problem, also in there.
Okay.
Great.
So that's, yeah, we try, the actual IVS phone, we do need a real landline
Real
for
phone line,
that.
right.
So we're still going to end up with one
Sure.
phone line and going in there.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any other questions, comments from the board? Ms. Cook-Lippman?
Thank you. I know that recently our Secretary of State announced the possibility of some broad sweeping reforms for the Registrar of Voters, and now I believe there's a bill being considered in Hartford. And I know chances of the bill passing and anything happening in fiscal year 16 are slim, but I'm wondering if you, or maybe even the First Selectman, have any more information on this, if it is at all possible that it could impact this current budget.
Probably the most immediate thing would be a mandate to have more training, and different types of training, more technical training in terms of computer use and what have you. Our own election review committee submitted a report to the Board of Selectmen Wednesday, and in it they said, more training, and also the use of laptops for recording ongoing, sort of a daily log. What we use now is basically a paper little notebook type of thing. And as I said originally, some people put a lot in, some people don't, and it's hard to read their writing when you do have to read it. So that was a suggestion. I don't know what the Board of Selectmen is going to do with that. They just got that report, so that's something they may want to implement, at least in terms, and then we'll have to figure out where that money would be coming out of, either IT or my budget or whatever. In terms of the state, in terms of, mostly training, they are talking about some other system that they may pay for, they may not, who knows, regarding the actual results of the election going to wherever it needs to go instead of waiting, to be filled out in paper type of thing.
If I understood your question, I'll try and answer the one I understood anyway. And one is the Secretary of State had a proposal on about a drastic restructuring of the Registrar of Voter offices. I have a hard time believing that would be implemented before the terms of the elected officials are up. So in terms of fiscal 16, I don't think that's happening. Based on who you talk to up there, you can get a wide range of odds on whether that bill will see the light of day at any point. So it's not something that's eminent by any stretch. And I'm getting very mixed views up there in terms of what the likelihood of anything actually coming out of that. So I guess I'd say stay tuned on that front. But
just to follow up, thank you, Mike, and thank you. I heard you mention that it was suggested to have more training. So I assume, because this was such a recent report, none of that additional training is included in this budget?
Like I said, we do have some training for a trainer to come and train people for being moderators, that type of stuff. We do training prior to an election or an election event, and that comes out of our seasonal budget because we're paying people to be there and we're paying them for that. So that's where that training is from.
And I think just for clarity on the board, I think it's important to understand that the Registrar of Voters are not town employees and do not report to anybody in the town. So any recommendation along the lines of more training needed would be something that would be a suggestion to the registrars for them to decide if they wish to put that funding in the budget and wish to do that. So it literally, it's a recommendation. It's not something that the town can make happen or have happen. So just so we're clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Just to follow up on redistricting and associated costs, you mentioned that you would do at least one mailing prior to the next election, alerting people of their, potentially their new polling places. Your postage in the budget is flat. It hasn't gone up. Have you accounted for the costs associated with those additional mailings?
I was hoping Matt would be here because he normally deals with that type of stuff. He's the one that, suggested that as a budget. So
Was this back in November, December before redistricting was passed, or?
Oh, that was, when did the, what was the deadline for the budget when we talked to you and talked to the first selectman?
Thanksgiving.
That was around Thanksgiving? Because I think we mentioned that anyways, if I remember right. So I know it was discussed that we would.
Was there a discussion about potential need for increase out-of-pocket costs for those mailings or other communications with the public about?
I remember there was a discussion at the first selectman's office when we were reviewing the budget, and I remember it was discussed. At least that's my thinking of it. And Matt handled that, so I don't remember.
If I might, Linda, do you have the supporting documentation that shows how that number was arrived at?
Yes, yes.
Could you share that with us?
Well, I'm just reading through. Let me grab it. I got to read through the. Okay, outgoing mail for new voters, 2,500 pieces, estimated to cost half, 1,225. Voter changes, estimated to cost $735. Canvas, call it $350. Incoming mail, go about another.
Linda, no one can hear you.
1,100. Oh, another 1,100. Permits, non-standard mail, and nonprofit postage brings you up to a total.
They still can't hear you, Linda.
A
microphone. Is your mic on?
Yes. Brings you up to about $5,035 if you itemize all those.
Well, I guess I didn't hear anything about, I mean, I heard mailings, but
Right,
I'm just
I don't see anything
concerned we don't.
Documentation for the new district.
Right, because there is a line here saying that, notifying voters about their correct state and local polling locations will be done by this office using funds within the current budget. I just want to be assured that we have enough money to alert the voters.
Just to clarify that, I believe, Roger, and catch me if I'm, when that says current budget, I think they mean fiscal 2015 budget, not 2000, so it doesn't have to be in fiscal 16 if it's in fiscal 2015. Are you going to notify the voters of their polling places before June 30th?
That may have been a plan, I don't know. I think we were, whether or not we would do it that early.
Budget was same for this year, though.
Yeah.
Same for-
Maybe it's something to get back to us on. Something to get back to us on?
Yeah, we'll get back
What
to
are we
you.
talking about?
Right.
Whether or not the,
Jump change.
Mr. Mottola?
If I'm understanding the question, it's the 5,000 has been essentially the same number for the last couple of years, and I think it's been that number because being on the original redistricting committee a few years back, it was probably the thought that the RTM was going to pass a redistricting plan back in, I guess it was 13, and then maybe there was a thought process back then that you were going to need the 5,000 plus for the mailings then, and since it hasn't passed until only recently, that line has essentially stayed the same. Is that possibly an explanation?
it could be that. Also, we never really overspend the postage budget anyways. I mean, if you look at the actual, the one I have, we only, as of now, it's not even 2,000 that we spent already.
We just need assurances that you're
Yeah, well,
you're
I'll look
you're
into
comfortable
it.
with the
I'll
number.
look into it, yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? If not, we will move on. Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As part of my legal practice, I represent clients that are before some of the next couple of boards, so I'm going to recuse myself and step out of the room to avoid the appearance of impropriety. So I'm not going to be here for the Zoning Board of Appeals, Town Planning and Zoning, Probate Court, Historic District Commission, or Conservation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. We'll come get you with the shellfish.
Great. Can hardly wait.
Have fun.
Zoning Board of Appeal, where am I? Zoning Board of Appeals, page 87.
Good evening.
Good evening, welcome,
Joe
thank
Devanchik,
you.
Town Planner.
Any comments for us?
No, other than, as you can see, we're proposing a zero increase in that budget. We feel confident we could take care of business with the current budget figures.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments for this budget? I just have one quick, what do we spend advertising on?
That's our notice of decisions, notice of meetings.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions, comments? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Moving on to town planning and zoning.
Yeah, my general comment here is there are, other than the increase having to do with the collective bargaining agreement salaries, the only other increase that I show in any line item is in our fees and professional services.
Yeah.
The reason for that is we're requesting to maintain the $2,400 for our department. What was added to that line item was and you've heard about you've been hearing about the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council, which the city of, or town of Fairfield is a member. The other members, towns are Easton, Monroe, Stratford, Trumbull, and Bridgeport. And there is a fee due that's required by these municipalities to pay the Greater Bridgeport. It's $18,053. That is a fee that is put together, an assessment done for all the different communities. Again, it's basically the dues under the town, and this year, it was placed into my line item budget. And Mr. Selectman did that. He said, well, Joe, don't argue. I've raised your budget. You've been asking me to raise your budget, and he did that. And that's the reason for that increase.
Sure, you're very appreciative.
I was sure Joe would smile when I said that. He didn't.
Yeah, I did.
And just by way of explanation, also, in talking to the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council, they're effectively a planning group. They helped us with the hazard mitigation plan. They're helping us with our plan of conservation and development on a regional basis, but also the Fairfield components. And in other towns, they are, in the planning budget as a line item. So it seemed to make more sense to put them here than to group them with some of the other groups. They're basically performing services for the town. They're the group that we get much of our federal money through. So when we get $1 million to redo Kings Highway and the sidewalks, that comes through the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council. It's something that zoning's involved with, engineering's involved with, Mark Barnhart's involved with in community development. So it's all part of that, and this seemed to be a more appropriate place to have that line.
Okay. Mr. Becker?
I may have missed it, but where was it before?
In the not-for-profit grouping.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Not-for-profit book, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
That was in there, right?
Yep.
Great. And do we know what last year's number, I mean, this is just moving it or thereabouts?
It's fixed. It's
Same in
fixed
last
every
year's
year.
budget. Okay, perfect. Great.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Becker. Any other questions or comments? Any comments from the public? Okay, back to the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Page 93, Judge Caruso, probate court.
Phone that one in.
Good
Thank
evening.
you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. Joined here today with our Chief of Staff, Attorney Kate Maxim, and as you know, the Fairfield's been fortunate to have our own probate court since 1663. You know how there were no microphones then. Actually, when I was on the Board of Finance, Jack Leahy would say, "Could you talk louder? I got to write quicker." So that's how we did it. You'll notice that our budget is down by 6.4%, and we try to economize wherever we can.
Thank you very much. So it's a reduction in postage and printing.
That's correct. And the postage, when we changed the system increased notice requirements so that more people on each individual case there were more people to send notice to. That, of course, increased ours, and when it first occurred, we tried to anticipate what those needs were. They seemed to be a little less than we had anticipated at that time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Mr. Becker?
So the state, there's some issues going on with the funding. Obviously, that isn't entirely settled, if I'm correct. It's up there at the session now, but there's been some concern about, if I have it right, losing all of the funding that would have come from the state. How should we, I pose this sort of as a question, but perhaps you have, I know there's been discussion about raising fees and sort of the other ways of hitting it, but at some point, is that something that the town perhaps should be looking at to make sure our citizens kind of don't get massive fees on things, and maybe it's spread out? I mean, you know, or do you have a plan? I mean, obviously, with the session and with our budget, I mean, you know, the timing is going to be difficult there. But I think it's a worthwhile conversation at this point.
Well, I appreciate that. As you mentioned, the governor's budget sort of zeroed out any funds over and above that which are generated by user fees. And so, and that hasn't happened in the past 350 years. So right now, we anticipate that we will be able to obtain most of the funding from the state. The town's obligation, by statute as it's been, is to supply the facilities and the means by which we can run the court. The state, we have that, we're a state entity located in the town hall. And so I wouldn't anticipate the town to bear any greater burden than that. So that in terms of, we hope that the legislature will see the light and fund us, because otherwise they are just passing the costs along to the people who come to us in their time of need, and that's unfortunate, but that's going to be up to the legislature.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. That's good to hear that you are somewhat optimistic on that end. I think just my own view would be, and I don't know exactly where the statute would go to even permit us in that, but if we started having problems where it was entirely driven by the fee, as you mentioned, a concern that I have, and hopefully the legislature will fix it, because it is simply passing the buck one way or another downstream, but it's at a time of need for some people, and sometimes obviously the estates can handle, and sometimes it's a very difficult time for people. And I would hate to see that burden at that time be stressed too much,
Right.
and would want to figure out a way to try to alleviate that to some degree. So hopefully the state will do the right thing, but I'd be interested to know, if not, moving forward on our end.
Great,
So.
and I appreciate that, because what we're seeing is a lot of the money, the largest increase, where we need the money the most, is to supply attorneys, to supply guardians, and studies for indigents. That's where the growth there is, and that's what the state is not funding. And so you are correct. That's where we are concentrating on to make sure that need is met. I also want to point out that we have so many attorneys and other volunteers in this town that we see who spend of their own time and of their own money, who volunteer for us, so that we're able to help the citizens of this community, and to them, we owe a great deal of thanks.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Any other comments? Any comments from the public? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Historic District Commission, page 94. Anybody here from the Historic District Commission? The answer is no, so that's $12,000. Should we just cross it off?
Yeah. No show, no dough. Done.
I'm only kidding. They do very important work for us. All right. I don't want anyone to take offense. Right. I don't want anyone to take offense. So any comments from the board on this budget? Mr. Tetra,
Chair, what I'll
anything?
do is check with the chair of the Historic District Commission, and something may have come up that prevented her from getting here tonight.
Right.
But we'll check on that and see if we can follow back up with the board.
And she's more than
Obviously-
welcome to come back another night.
Yeah. Obviously, this commission is one that does much work for the town.
Right.
And certainly in terms of preserving our historic heritage, it's a group that I've been talking to about being more proactive in terms of helping our citizens in historic homes, both with looking at different types of construction techniques, repair techniques, different types of material that would pass, creating more of an educational focus, becoming more of a distribution point for information on grants in terms of the maintenance and preservation of historic homes. Because quite simply, if we don't do a good job of protecting our historic homes, a big piece of our heritage goes away. Not in the next few years, but in the next generation or two. And that's really, and certainly as we lived through last year in our 375th, we got to remind ourselves how important that is to everybody, respecting our heritage and seeing that. So they definitely do a very important part of that. They have certain legal obligations they have to do in terms of regulatory issues, and that's one of the reasons for the payroll line on this, beyond just the secretary to take minutes. And I will follow up with them and see if they can join us another night.
Thank you very much. Any comments, any other comments? Comments from the public? Okay. We will move on to conservation, page 96. Actually, 97. 97, 98, 99. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Any comments? I'm sure you do.
I'm Annette Jacobson. I'm the Assistant Conservation Director and Wetlands Administrator. This is Ed Jones, our Open Space Manager and
Welcome.
Wetlands Compliance Officer. We have some people in the audience as well, our Chairman of Conservation, Kevin Gumper, and some commission members, and I believe some public are here to make comments as well.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to start in revenue or just the basic budget.
Let's start with,
Start with revenue,
yeah, let's
yeah.
start with revenue, I believe page 46, 47. Is that correct? Yes, bottom of page 46, top of page 47.
It lists the three-year prior average at $205,000, and at the end of February, we had revenue of about $154,000 so far, and our revenues were very seasonal. A lot of our new applications come in springtime. I think our applications had been delayed right now because of the snow. We're just starting to get a lot more in, so right now, I don't see a problem with reaching that. But, every year is a little bit different, but I think we're good on the $205,000 for this year.
All right, thank you very much, and that's the average for the previous 3 years, $205,000, and that is a budget for fiscal year 2016, correct? Okay. Any comments on revenue? Okay. We'll move on to page 97, 98. Any comments? Would you like to talk about the positions?
Yes. The commission has decided that we're looking for 3 positions. They were all previously approved and held by the department. Our main priority for this year is our Wetlands Compliance Officer. We really need that position, as we're going to call Ed Jones here / he's our open space manager / wetlands compliance officer. We are stealing him away from the open space manager program to do inland wetlands business. Right now, he's doing more than 50% of his time in the inland wetlands program, and we need him to do the open space manager program. So although the First Selectman has generously in the budget proposed to fund the position as a part-time position, which we do appreciate, we do feel that we need that position funded as full-time. It has been full-time since 1974, and we would like that position restored. In the past, Mr. Jones had been our wetlands compliance officer before he became our open space manager. So we feel that it would restore the wetlands program to normal, to address the building development need, and then restore our open space program, which needs attention, so that he can supervise the crew and get those other projects going from the open space side of it, so that our whole department could function normally.
Okay, thank you.
So
Any
that's
follow-up?
our
Okay.
top priority.
So you're currently splitting your time between open space manager and acting as a compliance officer? Yes. Is that correct? Okay. Can I just ask a question? What's the, you're asking for 3 full-time positions, okay? So we have the wetlands compliance officer, the secretary, and conservation laborer. Could you just review with us, the secretary and a conservation laborer?
Right now, we have a part-time secretary that we'd like to make the full-time position. And the conservation laborer, we have other full-time laborers, but in the past, the laborer position had been cut as well.
Okay.
So far and away, the top priority this year is the wetlands compliance officer, but making the part-time secretary full-time and replacing the field laborer position.
Okay. And then the laborer,
Right.
additional position. When was the position cut?
Which one?
The compliance officer? What year
It
was
was
that?
full-time from 1974, and the incumbent in that position voluntarily left that position in December 2008.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments, questions from the board? Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. So, thank you for your question, because that's what I was going to ask. I'm looking at last year's budget, and yeah, you had the exact same request last year, and it was cut by the First Selectman. Open space manager means, well, let me put it this way. What is not happening because you're not acting as an open space manager right now? Because you're spending half your time doing wetlands management?
Basically, the open space program is about 1,200 acres of open space. That's above and beyond parks and recreation, fields, etc. We have a full-time crew of 3 people and 5 to 6 seasonals during the summer. Right now, they're a good crew, but they do need some loving attention, which they're not getting right now. So you can imagine we're losing out on that point, as they're not being supervised to the level that they need to be. Also, it's trying to update the inventory that's of open space, which is prescribed by the state statutes. Land acquisition has asked for an updated inventory, which I haven't been able to provide because I haven't been able to do the requisite gathering deeds together and so forth, and going back forth and updating our inventory. We're also supposed to be starting to compile the private open space as part of that figure. This would include conservation easements, et cetera, that are on private properties. We haven't been able to do that. And also, as a consequence of Sandy, has pushed everything into the back room or out the back door. these tide gates take a lot of supervision over the guys. They are
The what, I'm
knowledgeable.
sorry?
I'm sorry?
You said what takes a little supervision?
Well, the self-regulated tide gates in town.
Oh, tide gates, oh.
Ed, if you would, just move the microphone closer, I think you need to speak a little more into it so folks can hear you.
Yes, the self-regulating tide gates in town. Sandy revealed a lot of age deficits there. We've done some repairs up to this point in time.
And that's an open space issue?
That's open space. Is there a mechanism that really we're the only ones in town who know how they operate because they were designed by Tom Stanky. And it's come to, as we're inspecting them more and more, we're finding age cracks and so forth. Some of them are coming towards the end of their projected lifespan, 20 to 30 years. In rotation, we're taking them off, breaking them down, having them sandblasted, regalvanized if possible, repair parts made per the drawings. That has to be supervised, that it's above and beyond what my foreman can do. And we have nobody else to do that. This isn't off-the-shelf stuff either. And I foresee that there's some culverts out there that are going to need immediate attention in the near future, and tide gates being reinstalled. And this has all been looked at with the coastal resiliency. And what the Flood and Erosion Control Board, their proposal, that was a report made to this Board of Selectmen.
Right. I had a note from last year. Inland wetlands is not supported because it's not mandatory. Is that true? Did I write that in error, or?
Inland wetlands is mandatory.
Okay.
Every town has to have an inland wetlands agency, and it's regulatory, and there's legal time limits. So that's why we steal Ed's time, because Tom Stanky would say it's the inland wetlands monster, because we have to do those things, and we have to do them very timely. We steal his time away, because these open space matters can take a little longer. They don't have the same kind of time limits. So we take Ed's time and we feed the inland wetlands regulatory monster because it has to get done. It has to get done in a certain time frame.
Okay.
And we keep putting off the open space, but those maintenance responsibilities in open space are still
Yeah,
there.
they're not going away.
And they're coming due. They're all
Right.
coming due.
Right. I remember this conversation from last year, and I remember thinking that, I can't imagine why we didn't fund this. So the secretary and the laborer are not associated with the wetlands compliant officer, right?
The laborer is definitely open space.
Okay.
The secretary can assist in the open space and general office programs. And I have letters of support for the Wetlands Compliance Officer program that people have written. I don't know if they've gone through the finance office, but I have letters of support that I could hand out. I have copies for everyone.
I don't know if it was emails, I saw emails. I saw enough emails to make me think that it was worth supporting, frankly.
Okay, but if anyone needs them, I have copies for
You
everyone.
can get them to the chief fiscal officer, and he'll make sure that we get them in email form.
So if I may, through the chair, I'm curious why the first selectman is, and I know you did offer her a half-time, so I understand that. I'm curious why you're reluctant to fund these positions 2 years from now, 2 years running.
Actually, it's been longer than that, but,
right, good
you know,
point.
this board has made it very clear that full-time positions are not part of the plan. They have consistently cut full-time positions, including school security, the senior center. So I looked at this as not an answer, but a
We
bridge.
haven't cut any school security full-time?
2 years ago, Mr. DeWitt, 2 years ago.
Okay.
It's been very clear over the last 2 years that this board would not fund any full-time folks, including we had one in for the finance department at one stretch. It's been a tough stretch to get part-time positions in. Nurses were cut last year. The finance department person was cut last year. So I am hoping that we'll support a part-time position. Now, if this board chooses to increase that to a full-time position, that would be fabulous, because I agree with everything that Ms. Jacobson said, We are falling behind. This is not the solution, adding a part-time position. It does two things. It starts the process by taking care of it, and it gives us a chance to balance tax increases out over a couple of years. We may, in fact, look at adding another part-time position if that was supported by the board and get the work done. I've already been talking to DPW and Conservation to see if there's a way to package some work that we can hand off to DPW. So even though Conservation is short of laborers, that there's some way to get that work done. Again, neither one of these is the long-term answer, but it's a way of maintaining a lower tax increase, but also starting to get work done. So that's the strategy, simply
Okay.
put.
But in defense of this board, if I may, the nurses were in your recommendation last year. We decided to take them out. That is our right to do so. But these have not been in for 2 years. So they've never gone into the overall percentage of budget that gets published 3 weeks before we start this budget process. So our adding this in would, of course, increase the percentage of budget increase. So.
Oh, yes, it would.
If the first selectman was really behind this, I would think that it would be in the first selectman's budget, and then you'd let us just cut it as we see fit.
Let's be clear. I put school security over this, and you guys cut school security. So if you want to take that, have that discussion, Mr. DeWitt, I'm happy to. But if you're going to cut multiple people for school security, delay school security over a year, right? I fully support conservation. I fully support the people going in. However, I absolutely put school security over this.
I believe a couple
And
years ago.
we added school security ourselves last year, so.
Actually, you revalidated what the Board of Selectmen did.
Okay.
A couple years ago with school security, and we don't need to get into discussion about school security, but this board has supported school security all the way through. What we were looking for was a plan which the Chief McNamara agreed with, and he put one together. When that plan was put together, this board was very supportive of school security.
We can have this discussion if you want. I'm happy to go back through it. What I would suggest to you, if you look at the number of things that we have been putting in the budget, from surplus for contingency to increasing, at times, pension, debt service, there are a number of, and trying to get paving in the budget to help with this. There are a number of things we've been trying to get into this budget.
We're going down a slippery slope here.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
so
Did you
yeah.
give him the floor, or did he just cut me off?
Right. Mr. Tetro, go ahead.
All right.
Finish.
We have been progressively putting more and more things in the budget, from DPW trucks this year to the highest amount for paving that we've had, to increasing support for finance, as well as putting the nurses back in, again, for the health and safety of our school kids, all right, and trying to address the conservation piece. And simply put, there's only so much one can do all in one budget. So I fully support, if this board wants to increase that to a full-time position, you have my full support.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tetro. And my comment just was specifically for the school security, but we can have that another time. Mr. DeWitt, any follow-up?
I don't want to continue this conversation, thank you.
Mr. Mottola?
Just understand a couple of things. And I guess this is to Mr. Tetro, too. We're in the process of hiring a director for that department now. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I guess my question is, and I don't know how I go on this, to be honest with you right now. Do you think it might be more prudent to wait until you have a full-time director who's going to look at your operations to decide whether it's better to have this as a full-time or part-time position? I'm just curious. I think I know what your answer's going to be, but why wouldn't you want to wait until you have a new person in place?
Tom Stanky, the former conservation director, was there for 43 years, and before he left, he prepared a very detailed report in June. He called it his Status and Trends Report. Very detailed report, and in that report, he said we absolutely positively needed a full-time wetlands compliance officer. He updated that report in August, and he did another update of that report in September. All three of those reports indicated that we needed a full-time wetlands compliance officer. They also went on to have other recommendations for the department. But in all three cases, in charts and graphs and colored, other things, they all indicated that the first step was the full-time wetlands compliance officer that the commission endorsed in their budget in December. So that's what's before you. That was an absolute given with Mr. Stanky's experience with the department, his 43 years. In my 31 years of being there, I started out as wetlands compliance officer. Ed Jones was wetlands compliance officer. I think we have some understanding of the position and what's needed in that position and in the department in general. So no matter what other changes can go on in knowing the regulatory program and knowing the development of Fairfield and what we're seeing and what has gone on, and even in the ups and downs of the economy, we have never once caught up in the bottoms of all of the economies, ever. So we very strongly felt that this position was absolutely, positively necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just go to Mr. Becker. I'm sorry, I didn't see him.
Thank you. Just a quick question about the part-time position. I know that you said half your time goes to wetlands compliance right now. So I am just wondering if you have a part-time employee, if that will allow you to completely get away from wetlands compliance and do your job solely and not have to continue doing wetlands compliance work.
Well, currently, even with my half-time attention to the inland wetlands compliance officer job, there's still a number of things that aren't being done. Most namely, the things can wait, if you will, or some of the violations and so forth. Some of them are presently in and out of court that have been put on the back burner. There's a couple of violations that I haven't cited. Work has stopped at. I don't want to start the clock to have to follow up on it when I don't have the time to. And also the snow on the ground is nobody's going to be doing very much. There's still there's a great deal that's not being done, and just the wait on bonds being returned. I know as soon as the snow melts, there's going to be a lot of time that's going to be required to be put into that just to catch up, because we weren't able to do site inspections before during the winter months. Did I answer your question, or I'm sorry?
Yes, no, it sounds like there's still work that would not be getting done. I'm new to this board, so, just as a follow-up, I just want to say that I understand how difficult it can be to balance raising taxes and making sure that we fund everything that needs to be funded in this town. And I really do appreciate the First Selectman's efforts to, it seems to me, compromise and try to find somewhere in the middle. With that said, I'm kind of with the First Selectman that, if this board wants to support a full-time compliance officer, then, I'm all for that. I think conservation is very important. But I do also appreciate the need to strike a balance, and that there are other departments that are also needing staff, right? It's hard. So thank you very much, though, for all you do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stone.
Would it be better to have 2 part-timers instead of 1 full-timer, budgetary-wise, without the payment of benefits? I don't know how it would work on the department, and...
Yeah, from that standpoint, I think part of the discussion is to the point that Mr. Mottola made. Before you start making those kind of investments, multiple part-timers, a full-time person, I think you want the conservation director on board, so you make sure that he's part of that planning process and buys into all of that. I don't think we want to make those decisions without that person in place.
Just I'll go to Mr. Becker.
Yeah, thank you. So the part-time, how many hours a week is it? And then the other question is a full-time employee in your department, how many hours a week are those positions? Are they exactly 40? Are they higher or lower? I mean, they're all, the full-timers are part of THEA usually, right? So I don't know exactly what that prescribes, but if you could just describe the hour
I believe
count.
full-time is 35 hours, and part-time would be 17 and a half, because they wouldn't have benefits. So, or 19, possibly 19, but I'd have to double-check on the
The typical
part-time.
part-time position is 19 and a half hours
19,
in
So
town.
sorry.
19 and a half, and then the full is
35.
Okay. That answers it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Mr. Mottola, you're okay? Okay. Any other questions, comments from the board? I'll go to the public. Any comments from the public?
I'm Kevin Gumper. I'm the chairman of the commission. I live at 315 Carroll Road. Few points to be made here, mostly about the wetlands compliance officer. The way the department's been run for the last many years is we had a full-time director who was 2 employees because he worked about 70 hours a week. We won't expect the new director to be putting in those hours, so that's part of the crunch that we've had. Another part of the crunch that we've had is that we lost the wetlands compliance officer in 2008, which is at the bottom of the building boom, or the opposite of the booming, bottom of the building bust. Since that time, now we've been getting more and more applications in the wetlands program, and as Annette pointed out, wetlands in our department comes first, and it's actually wetlands applications come first, because by statute, we have a certain amount of work we have to do, we have to get out in a certain amount of time, and we have to do it. If you have a wetlands application in Fairfield, you know, you can't go to Westport and ask that board to fight. You have to go to our department. I'm not trying to be a wise guy, but you understand, we have to do it, and by statute, we have certain times that we have to, timeframes that we have to act within. Therefore, all the resources, the first thing the resources have to go to in this department have been the applications for wetlands, and that has been the monster that devours Ed's time. I think Tom figured out that 70% of the department's time, including Ed's time, went to wetlands applications, and that has greatly cut down wetlands enforcement and tremendously cut down our ability to maintain and keep up our open space areas, which we have a tremendous investment in time, money, energy, and town resources over the past, since the Sullivan era, in developing a really excellent open space program. In the course of interviewing people for the new director's job, everyone knows about the open space. No one that we've talked to has managed a program that has even half the open space we have. And it's something that the town should be very, very proud of. Probably something you don't quite recognize that we have, and you wouldn't know it unless it was gone. There's a tremendous amount of traffic, foot traffic. People use these spaces constantly, especially Lake Mohegan, Brett Woods, the paths around the old landfill area in the down by the, I call it the dumping, but that's not the salt marsh. We also have had a very good salt marsh program that's been, that's also something you wouldn't know unless you, I remember as a child, I into my 20s, going down annually and watching the Phragmites burn behind Oldfield School. It was an annual event. And largely due to the efforts of Tom, the department, the tide gates, et cetera, we've really changed that. There are no Phragmites down there. I mean, it doesn't Phragmites down there. They don't look the way they used to. You have nice Spartina grass. That whole
Don't
area.
have the fires, you don't have the mosquitoes, so we save the town money that way, too.
And we've actually started, and the impact, Sandy caused a lot of problems and to the tide gates, that we are seeing the impact of that directly on the folks that live in the meadows. They've came before us and made a very nice presentation because they have some, like, they have Dave Huntington and other people who really know wetlands and surveying and land use, and they can see that the phragmites are starting to take back over because we have a tide gate that has 4 openings and only 2.5 are working. This is something that requires maintenance, it requires someone overseeing the maintenance, and although we're talking about a wetlands compliance officer, the real impact of this has been on our open spaces and our marshes, and that's really, we want to get Ed back, if we can, into the area of working on those areas that need to be done, and then we can have Annette and a part-time person, I think, would be able to properly handle the applications and even then the enforcement of the wetlands. We've also been concerned, we have a concern, this is something we don't know, we have a concern that we don't have our wetlands rules and laws being enforced as well as they should be. I mean, we make the rules, we require the developers to put in the systems. We're not sure the systems are being cleaned and maintained the way they should be. And again, this isn't something you don't see because it works. For the most part, in the past 40 years, Tom did a great job in making sure, and it's not just Tom, it's zoning, engineering, building, conservation, did a great job in all these subdivisions that come in. We have none of these problems that you have in other towns where a subdivision goes in and a year later, your creek is completely full of silt or you have runoff or great erosion. We have almost none of that in Fairfield. And you probably don't even know what I'm talking about because you haven't seen it. But you go to some other towns and it's awful. That's, again, an investment we have. We've worked very, very hard on for 40, going on now towards 50 years, and we can't, these things all require maintenance, and that's why we really want a full-time inland, we really want a full-time open space person, and we probably have between 35 and 40% of an open space person now, and that's why we're asking for the wetlands compliance officer. It's kind of like going around Robin Hood's barn, but that's really what we need.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I believe there's other public that wishes to speak.
Hi, I'm Charlie Rowan. I live at 8 Philemon Street. I'm an alternate commission member for the Conservation Commission. I feel I'm sort of uniquely qualified to comment on this maybe because I've never served on this commission until last year. I've never been...
Can you use the mic that people in the back are trying to...
This one?
Yeah.
Can you? I just think that being as a new commission member is, I've never seen the volume and a pattern of work. It's enormous. I constantly get, every 2 weeks I get a folder 4 inches thick, and there's just new permits consistently every 2 weeks. Also, as more of a practical manager for a part-time wetland compliance officer, today I went to a Society of Wetland Scientists meetings. Everyone there is employed full-time. I can't imagine somebody, especially in the state of Connecticut, taking a part-time job if they do have a family to support. So that's another consideration to think about, is the quality and caliber of employee you would get only on a part-time basis. I don't think you'd get the quality of person that we do need for this town.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the public?
Joy Shaw, 476 Old Mill Road, also all right on Mill River. I'm going to read my statement, which is written in support of what the selectman has put forward to you, and then I'm going to add my own comment at the end. I'm speaking to who is the interim chairman tonight. I can't read that far.
Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown and members of the board. This letter is in support of the hiring of a part-time wetlands compliance officer for the Fairfield Conservation Department. Sound environmental management is failing in Fairfield due to the lack of replacement of the Fairfield Conservation Department wetland compliance officer since the retirement of the former WCO, Wetland Compliance Officer in 2008. The present situation demands, at a minimum, hiring of a part-time person in this position, as recently approved by the Fairfield First Selectman. The assigning of the Wetland Compliance Officer responsibilities to the Conservation Department Open Space Manager has increasingly usurped this staff person's time for open space management. The recent increase in inland wetland applications for development now takes an inordinate amount of the open space manager's time. This problem has been clearly shown in charts. I wish I had copied and brought you the charts that Tom Stenke made. I hope you may have had them provided for you at some time. They are explicit as to what has happened. No question. This problem has been clearly shown in those charts of staff time allotments that were kept and shared by the former Conservation Department Director. The assigning of Wetland Compliance Officer, Open space projects presently in need of overdue maintenance include the tide gates on 2 estuaries, designed by former Fairfield Conservation Director Tom Stenke, and essential to maintaining a healthy balance of salt marsh vegetation and protection of private property. Previous to the installation of the Stenke system, there were regular marsh fires threatening adjacent properties due to the high flammability of the highly invasive freshwater reed Phragmites, taking advantage of the lower salt content of the marsh soil. The Pine Creek Salt Marsh Restoration is an exemplary and renowned example of sound management up and down the Connecticut coast and beyond. This management depends on responsible attention to the special dikes that maintain the current healthy and community protective system, not possible under the present circumstances. Fairfield's 1,200 acres of open space includes many fine trails in areas such as Lake Mohegan, Springer Glen, Mill Hollow, etc. The upkeep of these trails depends on the added workforce of a carefully selected summer crew to enhance the small, regular Fairfield Conservation Department open space crew. The open space manager is currently so overburdened that he does not even have time to study and select from the applications for summer crew positions. The resultant lack of a summer force for trail trimming, rebuilding, and various other structural repairs is allowing trails to suffer from lack of appropriate attention to the expectable impacts of human traffic. This situation threatens and is creating detrimental conditions and harm to scenic routes, or lack of access safe for the public and compatible with an area's use tolerance. These are just two major areas that should be of special concern for this community. It is not just a matter of our looking shoddy, as exemplified by the disarray of posts marking the open space along the west loop of Old Mill Road by the Mill River. It is a matter of the need to respect and avoid deterioration of natural scenic assets, as well as assuring protection of private users and abutters. I urge this board to support the First Selectman in his taking the first step to repair a badly neglected Town of Fairfield responsibility by approving the hiring of a part-time Wetlands Compliance Officer for the Conservation Department, as he recommends. Respectfully submitted. But I will add that I am well aware that a full-time compliance officer is needed. And I hope that this is what you will, in your wisdom, be clear enough to see tonight and give you approval of.
Thank you very much.
I have copies of my statement.
We will put them in the minutes. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Pam Ritter of Elm Street. I'm a former member and officer of the Inland Wetland Commission and Conservation Commission. I'm here to reinforce everything that Mr. Gumper and Mrs. Shaw have said. Everybody in Fairfield knows about the open space program, and many people enjoy it. The deficiencies of upkeep and management are beginning to tell. But when you see an article in the local press about Fairfield's open space program, or about, wetlands, it's our Fairfield Open Space Program that they are emphasizing. And I just want to reinforce the need for better management and upkeep than Ed Jones is able to give it in his limited available time. So we do need support of this budget request. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi again, Alyssa Israel, 679 Roland Road. This is the reason why I'm here tonight. I urge this board to fund the 3 full-time positions asked by staff. I feel that if staff is asking for them, it's because they really need them. And I think we should listen to staff and what they need to run their department appropriately and effectively to serve the people of this town. As a beach area resident who was flooded severely by Sandy and who's been displaced for 2.5 years by Sandy, and we're about to move back in, I can tell you I want Ed Jones to make sure those floodgates are working, those tide gates are working properly in the culverts and everything else in the beach area so that we are protected. I want him to be able to do his job properly and everybody else in the department to be able to function effectively and efficiently. I spent quite a bit of time with the department during this crisis, and they were always gracious and helpful and wonderful, but I could see they were taxed. My name went on a list of like 50 other people before they could get to me, and they got to me pretty quickly. I was surprised because they were doing the best they could, but it took about a month before they were able to get out to my house. Also, I would like to point out that finding a qualified conservation director may be difficult if they know this department is not functioning properly. If they're walking into an understaffed department, I think word gets around and they're going to know that this might be a very taxing job and they're just going to be stretched too thin. So I think that's going to turn some really qualified candidates away. So I think that's something to be aware of. So I think getting this department working properly is extremely important. And lastly, I'd like to point out the town of Greenwich, a town similar in population, and there may be 2,000 more people in Greenwich, and they have slightly larger land, square miles of land, but it's a town similar to Fairfield. Their conservation has 11 staff people. Okay? Maybe we don't want 11, but we can do it with fewer, but I think that just shows you the discrepancy in the two departments in two similar-sized towns. And I think that's it. So again, I urge this board to please fund these 3 positions, and also to listen to staff from other departments who need to fund positions to make this town function properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Me again. Hi, Mary Hogue. I sent you an email right before I came on this, but I just wanted to reiterate, I am part of a group called Fair Plan, and we wrote a very detailed letter to you. We've done a lot of investigation into this. And this isn't, to me at least, it's not just an issue about nature or environment or conservation. It's also a financial issue. There are a lot of reasons financially why it's important that we do this kind of support. We've been hearing about the fires and the mosquitoes and the marshes, and the fact that all that land mass is now livable, and the property values are much higher because of that. That's all a very positive financial thing. The problems that the tide gates aren't working properly and these problems are starting to creep up on us again, that's a concern in terms of finances as well as the environment. The fact that the open space is so abundant in our town, and it's throughout the town, it's known that properties around these open spaces are of higher value. So that's another financial reason. It's also a liability. If we're not properly maintaining our open space and all these people are using it, we want to make sure that they're safely using it. We need people out there maintaining those trails and all that area. So it is very much an environmental issue, and I'm not going to deny that. But I know that there are concerns on the financial side in terms of hiring a full-time person. And I think that you'll find that there's a lot of financial reasons why you really want to do it, that it will actually be a very good return on our investment. So I hope you'll have a full-time inland wetlands compliance officer, and you'll be able to justify it financially as well as for all the environmental reasons as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments?
May I make another comment?
Yes, ma'am.
I just hadn't heard, maybe my ears aren't good enough to catch it, but something I've heard again and again. I had a nice long talk with the compliance officer of Milford, and she was so proud of the fact that she felt she was saving her town a tremendous amount of money in the lawsuits that can come if you don't exactly prepare well when you have a decision to render to an applicant developer. And those lawsuits, we all know, are pretty darn costly. And she was so proud of the fact that her position, full-time, keeps that from happening in Milford, keeps it down. So that's a huge one to think of.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the public? If not, I'll come back to the board. Any comments from the board? I want to thank the Conservation Department, thank the public, and I'll just make one comment about this, that I can assure you, since I've been on this board, that every new item, every new position recommended or requested for is given its due diligence. I mean, budgets are about trade-offs in any given year, but every line item, every new position, whether it's from the Board of Ed, the Senior Center, Conservation, is given its due diligence and it's well thought out, and then we make a recommendation. So we can assure you that this position will be given the same consideration. Thank you. What I'd like to do now is take 5 minutes. We'll get Mr. Walsh, and we'll come back at 9:45. Thank you. Back in session, please. Thank you very much. We're back in session, and we're going to page 104 for the Shellfish Commission. Welcome back. We're glad to see you again. So, page 103, 104. Any comments on this budget?
It's a very small increase. It's basically just so that the commission can have shellfish clinics, clam clinics, to show the public what to do. So it's really around $300 when you look at it. It's an $8,000 budget, overall budget. And the Shellfish Commission members themselves hold these clinics, and very hands-on, and they do a lot of volunteer work. They're great commission members. So it's really a very small increase.
Okay, thank you very much. Any comments or questions from the board on this budget? Seeing none, any comments from the public?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to page 107, miscellaneous contingencies. Mr. Mayor? Any comments on this budget?
This budget is budgeted every year at about $45,000. If you look at the history, it's, 14 when we spent $10,000, 13, $9,000, 12, $37,000. This year, we'll probably spend the whole 45,000. The budget is primarily for like blight and condemnation costs, Board of Ed, arbitrage, legal expenses, not for the attorneys, but for filings and expert witnesses, grievance, same types of expenses for any town grievances. And then it's also just a catch-all of things that just some other types of specific items, but mostly of, legal and legal filing types. So we've budgeted it again at the 45, and there's really not much else to say.
Thank you very much. Any comments, questions? Mr. Walsh?
Where do we stand right now in 15 of what we've spent so far in this account?
Through March 3rd, I think it's like 20,000, but I know there's another 12,000 that's coming through there, so that's the other thing that went in there this year was some of the expenses related to the deputy chief hire, because those weren't budgeted elsewhere. So that's that kind of catch-all. Yeah, so we're probably year-to-date, I think, somewhere like 35.
Did we raise the budget up to 45 a couple years ago because of expenses with the tax appeals?
No, tax appeals don't go through here. This has been 45 as long as I remember, including my time on the Board of Finance, actually.
Man, that was a long time ago.
That was a very long time ago. Ancient history, baby.
Back when we used to carve the numbers in stone.
So there's hope I might have your job one day? I hope not. I have a finance degree. Watch out.
All right, you've been warned, Mr. Mayor.
Consider yourself warned.
Any other comments, questions on this budget? Seeing none. Any comments from the public? And seeing none, we are moving on to Community and Economic Development. Mr. Barnhart, page 115. Yes, if we can go to, do we have revenue for this?
Just move some revenue from the first.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, didn't we just move, Mike, from the first selectmen's
Right.
to your budget, to Mark's budget now? No?
Sorry. Mark, we're talking about the banner money we moved from the First Selectmen's account. We took that and moved that to the same account that the parking revenues go in, the downtown parking revenues.
Oh, okay.
So that's a, forget the
Special
exact,
account, right.
yeah, I forget the
Special
exact term.
account.
But
Okay.
that's not in this budget per se, but those are
All right.
monies that are available to Mark to use in downtown promotions, that type of thing.
All right.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walsh. So we're back to page 115, 116. Any comments for us in this budget?
I'd be happy to answer questions that members may have. I know this is,
Well, we have a 7.9% increase. 5 of it is from payroll. You asked for funds also to seed funding, you call it, for the development of an economic development strategic plan.
yeah, it's mostly, the increase is mostly in the fees and professional services line, and I'm proposing a slight increase there, partly to fund an economic development strategic plan. It's been any number of years since we've undertaken that type of initiative. I can't really put my finger on the last time that we did that. I think it's important, not that I'm anticipating major shifts in our focus in terms of, most economic development offices look at business retention and expansion efforts, small business development, business attraction. So we're going to be continuing to do all those things, but it will help guide those efforts and fine-tune those efforts in a major way. I have been able so far to actually secure a $10,000 grant from United Illuminating Company in support of that effort. So the idea was that we would use some of the town funds and be able to leverage that against other grants and support from outside, be able to retain a consultant, augment the in-house resources, and work with the commission and other stakeholders to do that strategic planning effort.
Would this fold into anything that you're working on, Mr. Tetro?
Exactly. I think that we've had, Mark is putting, and the Economic Development Commission is working on this. The library is working on theirs. Police and fire are looking at things. I mean, you heard last year from Terry Giegengak. She's looking at that for social services in terms of what we're doing. That we have a number of planning initiatives. I just think that we've got to have the umbrella plan, the strategic plan that pulls all that together. As it was mentioned, it's been a suggestion of this board that we have one, but also as I talk to other business leaders around town, that's one of the things that they look for in what we're doing. So,
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments from the board? Mr. Walsh?
Your advertising account doubled. What's the reason why you're doubling it? Is there new advertising that needs to be done? Or are you trying to advertise Fairfield someplace, or?
Well, we do want to at least be out there in terms of making sure that businesses that are looking at communities in the Northeast and Connecticut, in particular Fairfield County specifically, are aware of what we have to offer in Fairfield. So I think in the past we've looked at more traditional print media. I think increasingly we're looking to grow our presence through social media, online, even video. I think one of the things that I've talked about here, and we've done small steps this year, partly because we were forced to. One of the services we provide is a commercial space availability survey list. We have a one-stop location on our website, as well as a list that we produce quarterly of all the commercial spaces available for lease or for sale in town. Not that you can't find that information in different places elsewhere, but we try to assemble it in one spot. So if people are looking for space in town, they have one spot that they can go and find it. This past year, the company that had been hosting that went out of business, and I scrambled a bit to bring that back online. In doing that, really looked at our website, not that we haven't made major strides in terms of improving the town's web presence over the last few years, but certainly the economic development portion of that can be a major marketing tool. And so I think I feel somewhat constrained with the existing framework that we're working within. One of the things that we think is very powerful is to hear from other business leaders as to why they selected Fairfield, why they think it's a great place for their business. And so one of the things that we like to do is have some of those testimonials of businesses that we work with successfully and really tell their story. So that would be part of our web presence, hopefully online. So we do look at other ways to get the message out, and that's part of also the increase that I'm looking for in the fees and professional services. I've been able to attract some interns, both paid and unpaid, from Fairfield and Sacred Heart. That's helpful, at least because I'm not the most adept at Facebook and other social media platforms, but increasingly I think we find that people get their information from a variety of different sources, and we need to be out there on all these various platforms. So whether we can continue to staff those types of things through interns, or whether we want to bring on board a marketing professional or somebody to help fill that void, so to speak, I think that's what I'm looking to do with some of the monies that we're requesting as part of this budget request.
And I've asked this question, I think, maybe definitely last year, if not the last couple of years. Where do we stand with what I consider to be the largest economic development in the town, being the Mr. Wittick's property at the Metro Center?
We continue to work with, I know the First Selectman and I have met with Mr. Wittick regularly and continue to do so in an effort to try to chart a path forward. He's certainly of the opinion that the current development plan that he proposed and got approved through the various land use boards is not workable in the current marketplace. So we're certainly receptive to that idea. The thought is if we go back and retool that in any material way, there's certainly an opportunity to build support for that by working collaboratively with the town, not just officials like this board or the first selectman, my office, but the town generally speaking, in terms of what we're looking to accomplish there. So I think that's where we're focused on right now. Certainly he has some ideas as to what he'd like to see there, but we think that it's helpful to bring on board perhaps another party, third party, to help facilitate a dialogue between the development community and the community at large, the town, as to what we'd like to see accomplished there. But as I said before, he continues to market the site. It's not to say that we couldn't find somebody tomorrow that might want to take a 50% occupancy in one of the buildings there. It's unlikely, given certainly the dynamics we're seeing in the market further down county and where he's priced. And so I do agree with him in that sense that we do need to take a fresh look at it. But in doing so, I think we need to make sure that the town and the public at large is involved in that process. So that's what we've been encouraging to do.
And he's still not going to build a building until he gets it occupied?
I don't think he has the capacity to build on spec, or he hasn't shown the capacity to do that. So he's basing it on tenant demand, the demand for at least 50% or more of the building before he sticks a shovel in the ground. That's been the issue for a long time now in terms of getting that process moving forward. We are seeing a lot of other development and investment activity in that area. So there's a silver lining to that, because of the investment that the town's made in the new train station, it certainly has, from a real estate perspective, we've seen a lot of other investment and development activity in that area, which is good.
Yep. Thank you. Yep, go ahead.
If I can add on, in looking at the other major site, which is Exide. We've just met with the Exide people and the company they have working for them to finish the cleanup of Mill River. And they've got in a, I'm going to say best case scenario, they think they can get that done by November, December this year. So that site might be moving along faster than what we talked about. We talked about 2 to 3 years. That would be closer to the 2-year time frame. So that depends a little bit on how things go this winter, or this summer, how quickly they can get in the water in the spring. They're trying to get in the next 2 weeks. How the weather goes this summer and how much they can get done before the weather becomes a problem at the back end. But they have a plan that says that could be possible.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other comments from the board? Any comments or questions?
Thank you.
It's a nice article, I believe it was in the Connecticut Post business section. Back in the end of February, you were quoted extensively.
I've been popular with the Connecticut Post as of late, yes.
They had a nice snapshot of the future, right?
Yeah.
Let's hope we get there.
It was a little dated in terms of the visuals, but, it works.
When you look at what Mark is trying to do, and think about it, all that he's accomplished in terms of, we didn't have 3 sidewalk sales, we didn't have a restaurant week a few years ago, he's got all that put together. He did all that without more staff and with a shoestring budget to put all that together. We're starting to get more of that type of publicity out there. You didn't see those articles 3 and 4 years ago. The idea of promotion, what we've been talking about, is making sure that Fairfield stays in the play. Companies making decisions to move don't make those decisions on the spur of the moment. They're looking ahead of time. So we want to make sure that the town of Fairfield and all that's good about the town stays out there. The 375th anniversary really was just one long promotion for the town of Fairfield. That was one way of keeping our name out there. You've heard me talk about Gustav Whitehead. What's amazing is how much play that gets when you talk about Gustav Whitehead. And you get quoted in articles and Google things around. All that keeps Fairfield in play. And that's what we're trying to do. As the economy continues to come back, there are going to be a lot of communities out there looking for businesses to move there. We've got a low vacancy rate. We've got some big spaces we're going to need to fill. Once the Exide property starts to build out, and let's project that as 18 months from now, there's a lot going on there that they can fill. Once we get the Metro property in play, 1 million square feet or whatever it comes out to be with whatever, that's a lot of business. I think if you think back to the Metro Center, not the Metro Center, Merit 7, sorry, that took about 10 years to build that out. So anything we can do now to help with that promotion moves us along that timeline.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Stone?
Just on that line, do you get cooperation from the Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, excellent cooperation. So we work very closely. We both recognize that we have, resource constraints that we have to work within, and so it's best if we work collaboratively to try to maximize what each other brings to the table. So I'm pleased to say that we do work very well with the Chamber leadership, and I'm very grateful for that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stone. Any other comments, questions, any comments from the public?
Would recognize that one of my commissioners is here, Mr. Don Peterson, who's waited patiently in the back, so.
Welcome.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Last item for tonight, the Harbor Management Commission, page 119. 118, 119. Thank you and welcome.
Mr. Chair, if I might, Mr. North definitely deserves some special merit badge for waiting till this hour, last event, to present us a $24,000 budget that's down.
Saved you $100.
I agree.
Thank you so much for the offer.
Maybe we should remember this for next year, move you up the line a little bit. But anyway, thank you for waiting.
Next year, we're going to
You're welcome.
Next year, we're going to
Pleased to be-
swap the whole thing, so.
It's a level ask. Actually, we're down $100. If you have any questions, be happy to entertain them. The big news in the harbor is that we got the mouth of the harbor widened 75 feet, to 75 feet, I should say. It had shrunk down to 50 feet, which was a dangerous situation. And while we're not, and we'll never get back to the 100-foot width because of the panic grass and a lot of other issues, at least at 75 feet with a mean depth of 9 feet at low water, we feel we're in pretty good shape.
Okay.
So,
Thank you very much.
okay.
Any comments, questions? Any comments from the public? Thank you for waiting.
Thank you.
Any further comments about this budget, Mr. Stone?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
What about me?
You have the calendar? This was discussed with Mr. Flynn, the chair, but I don't, actually, in fact, in front of the board, but a couple of meetings ago, the need to move one of the meetings, but I don't have a calendar with me.
Your May 5th regularly scheduled Board of Finance meeting.
May 5th? Linda, if you could use the mic.
Your regularly scheduled Board of Finance meeting for May 5th is the mill rate setting meeting, but that occurs the day after the May 4th RTM vote, assuming the RTM does vote on May 4th. As you know, last year we carried over into the next
Right, it
morning.
could take 2 days.
Yeah, there's actually two issues. One day is not enough anyway. And then two, it could actually go another day. So I think I brought that up about 3 meetings ago, and at that meeting, Mr. Flynn asked people to check their, Chairman Flynn asked people to check their schedules, but it's just been overlooked the last couple of meetings.
So do you have any recommendations at this point?
Yeah, May 7th, which is the Thursday instead of the Tuesday.
That has the two added benefits. One is if the RTM goes over to Tuesday, it provides enough time for the Board of the Finance Department to do their calculations, provide proper paperwork to this board. Second, there is a Board of Selectmen meeting on Wednesday, and it provides an option for the Board of Selectmen folks to also attend the mill rate session and not get hung up in our meeting.
Right. Does anyone have any comments? I mean, I think we have to do
I'm
it.
not available that week, but sounds like a good idea.
Unless you want to move it to the week after.
Do we have to vote?
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we move our May 4th meeting to May 7th.
Do I have a second? Mr. Stone? Okay, Mr. Stone seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? It's unanimous. Okay.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing it up.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Stone?
Can I make a request that we get a list of the top 50 wage earners in the town, sort of like the Fairfield Minuteman or Citizen does every year, and see what's...
You mean
Check-
for the...
Check the Citizen newspaper.
Salaries, yeah.
For public, for
I
people
thought
that
you were
work for
talking
the
about
town?
people in the whole town.
No.
Wage earners. I was like, that's going to be an
No,
interesting
no.
list.
We don't need that
Good
one.
for Joy on that one.
It sounds like a real estate list.
Can I
I mean,
request
you
that?
can Google,
Well, if we can have-
Walsh, you'd call that a prospect list, I think.
That's a prospect. Do we have that list? It was
Yeah, I
in
mean,
the
it was
Fairfield
published in the paper
Citizen.
just a couple of weeks ago, actually.
Can we
Can we
get
get
it as
that?
an email or something?
Sure.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Stone. Any other questions, comments? If not, can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Walsh, second by Mr. DeWitt. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. We'll be back Tuesday.